They made Emily Blaster. Hello. Stream's back. How many of you read this book? Only 33% of you read this book. Hey, how's it going? How you doing? Christine, did you read the book? I finished on the 10th, so I guess I can't judge you. I only finished the book a couple days ago. And read it basically in the extra week I decided to have for book club. This stream's gonna be weird for you if you didn't read, so I could give a summary of the book. Although this book was... This is a hard book to just sort of summarize in a few minutes. I have 20 pages left. You better start reading Belle Delphine. I finished 30 minutes ago. Okay. Is it worth finishing? It started to feel heavy for me. I mean, I can't tell you, I don't know, if you don't want a book that's gonna make you feel emotions. I guess that's kind of up to you to figure out. I found this was a very easy book to read, even though it was kind of long. Chat is super delayed on screen, are you? It's on low latency. I forgot to change it. Yeah, if you find the first half of the book was kind of too heavy emotionally, you probably don't want to keep reading. Alright, so most of you failed your homework, so we're having book club when 2/3 of you haven't read the book. Is that what's happening right now? It was very easy to follow story in Escape from Reality. It punches you in the heart. At least 100 people read it? Okay, we'll take that. Half glass, half full. It was heavy for me. It was heavy. Although I have to be honest. Okay, do we want to do a summary? Christine didn't read the book. Do I need to tell Christine the story of the book? That's the way to do this. I pretend you're not here, and I'm like just telling Christine about the book I read. So there's this girl named Sadie. She's in the hospital. Her older sister, by older, we're still talking children, has cancer. But like a very curable cancer, you know? So obviously she's sympathetic for her older sister's situation, but it basically means her childhood, or a lot of it, is her sort of being less of a priority than her sick sister. And she spends a lot of time in the hospital. In the hospital, she meets this little boy named Sam. And you don't know this at the time, but Sam is there because he was in a car accident with his mother. His mother was killed. And he has a permanently disfigured... he is permanently disabled. His foot is just fucked. And he's been in the hospital for a while. I better leave now, don't want spoilers. It's book club. We're here to talk about the book. What do you mean spoilers? Okay, so Sadie doesn't know this, but Sam hasn't really been speaking to anybody in the hospital. So when she wanders into the games room at this hospital, and he starts playing video games with her, that is his first time, you know, having really any human contact after his traumatic event. And they bond over this. And Sadie, who is, I guess, studying for her bat mitzvah or whatever, her temple, she has to do community service. And I can't remember if it's her parents or her grandmother is like, oh, you spending time in the hospital, you know, playing games with this sick boy could count as your volunteer service. So she keeps spending time with Sam in this hospital, playing games with him, but each time she goes, she's filling out her timesheet, being like, here's how many volunteer hours I did. Sadie Sink. I had a lot of trouble not just thinking of Sadie as Sadie Sink as well, I have to admit. Eventually, one day, Sam finds out that Sadie was getting, like, community service credit for spending time with him, and he does not take this well, and he cuts her out of his life. He refuses to allow her to continue being a visitor. I think the important nuance there is she's been coming for hundreds of hours. Like, they have a literal count of how many hours she was visiting him in the hospital. She just sort of looked at it as like a game, I'm getting credit, but like she clearly considered him an actual friend wanting to spend time with him. She just liked the game of filling out the timesheet. Anyway, this sort of results in them not having a relationship for many years. The book starts with Sam seeing her in a subway station. And they see like a magic eye puzzle on a poster on a wall in a subway. And they sort of reunite in the context of a game. And he wants to reconnect with her at this point. Now she's studying... she's like a promising young video game developer at this time. She has a really talented teacher who also happens to be a giant piece of shit who instigates a romantic relationship with her that is abusive. And it really messes her up when he's like, I'm going to leave my wife for you, and then he never does, and it spirals her into a depression. She's at MIT, yeah. Dove, I liked him. You might be the only person I've met who liked the Dove character. That's very bizarre to me. I thought he was probably the worst written character as well, just in how like sort of comically awful he was. There could have been a little more nuance to that character, I think. He was fine at the end of the book. You know what? He kind of remains a friend in Sadie's life in a weird way, where like even at the end, she's embarrassed at how much she craves his approval for like how her career is progressing in the industry, which does feel kind of real, right? Even if someone has been terrible to you, you can still feel a certain way about them. Yeah, anyway, so when she is going through a really hard time personally, Sam sort of refuses to take no for an answer and keeps showing up at her door trying to get her to make a game with him. So the same way she had sort of been there for him at the hospital when they were children, he is trying to reciprocate and be there for her as she's clearly going through a hard time. And this leads to them working on a game together, which will eventually come out and be called Ichigo. Ichigo. I read most of the book not really knowing how to say that. Like, Ichigo? Apparently it's Ichigo. Thank you for the bless yous. I did love Sam visiting Sadie during her depression, such a great example to follow. Yeah. And they do the whole, well, I will promise we'll always be friends sort of thing. My age is showing? What? Ichigo. That's a generational thing, not knowing how to say Ichigo? I read the book, but the summary is really helpful. Forgotten the first half already. This is one of my main criticisms of the book, too, is reading this book kind of felt like eating a Big Mac. You know, tasted good, made me feel things, I enjoyed it, but a week from now, 2 weeks from now, I'm not really going to be thinking about that time I ate a Big Mac. I might be thinking about that time I had some, a nice steak at a nice dinner, and a year from now I'll be like, remember that really good Japanese A5 Wagyu we had that time? Yeah, I probably won't really think of this book that way. This book totally hinges, if we're kind of shifting to commentary, I'll go back to the summary. This book, I think, for anyone totally hinges, or at least for me, totally hinges on how much you believe in the Sadie-Sam relationship. And for me, it's less about their specific relationship and more about that's sort of what their relationship represents. It's sort of an archetype for the kind of platonic love you can have for someone in your young adulthood, in your like really formative years when you're becoming an adult. When you're shifting from adolescence to adulthood, there may be people in your life who you love in a non-romantic way, who you feel are like permanent fixtures in your story. And yeah, I think as long as you felt there was authenticity to their story, I think the book works. It is a little sort of like, it is a coming of age story, let's be real. And at times it felt a little like young adult fiction-y to me, which is not to say I'm above books written for younger people, but sometimes it did feel a little melodramatic in a teen coming of age story might be, right? Wish they didn't make Sam go all neckbeard about Sadie, though. I really don't think they did. But let's get into that in a bit. So, let's continue summary, since most of you didn't read the book. They make this game, Ichigo, and become sort of indie darlings in the video game world. They sell the rights to some publishing company out in Texas who really wants them to make a sequel in a tight time frame. Sadie does not want to do this. She sees video games as more of an art form, and that's sort of what she was known for at school at MIT. She got famous, or she became well known to her classmates for making a game where it sort of tricks you into being complicit in a concentration camp. A game called Solution, which I think is based on a real life video game that went uncredited, or a real life board game. But I think the creator of the board game didn't love not being credited in this book. Like the game was like, oh, you're just assembling cogs in a factory. And only by the end of the game do you realize that you are just, helping the Nazis build things. And so by the end of the game, either you were like totally just focused on the task of the game, which is playing it well, Whereas you could have also played the game where you were purposefully playing slowly, realizing what you were working for. Like, it's an interesting concept, and like a good example of video games as art, not just video games as I need to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. Anyway, so they signed this deal with this company because Sam is less concerned about video games as art form and more about like, hey, he didn't grow up with money. He, was living with his grandparents. He has a lot of debt from all his health issues. Sadie grew up much more comfortably. And he's like, I need this. I need just the money of the success of this game. Even though it results in a much worse experience for Sadie because she is the main programmer and he is more of an art director. He does some programming too, but he's clearly more of a creative force behind the games, not really the person who was doing the bulk of the technical work. And because of that, they have to rush a sequel that is sort of seen as a cash grab rather than just like a well thought out sequel, which often happens, right? After that, they make a different game. What's the next like pivotal plot point there? She's the brilliant mind. Yeah, but as the sort of next section of the book shows, it's really their sort of collective creative output that is what is brilliant, I guess you would say. Because the next game they make is one where like she designs one half of the game, he decides the other, and his section is much more popular than hers. They've moved to California at this point. They're hiring people. I haven't even mentioned Marks, which is Sam's roommate. Sadie going back to Dove for the end. Okay, so to finish the first game, between the two of them, they didn't have the resources to really finish the game. So Sadie had to go to Dove, her abusive boyfriend instructor, and ask to borrow his game engine that he developed for a successful video game he had already released called Dead Sea. And this was not something she wanted to do. She saw this as a bit of a defeat, having to go back to her abusers. I don't know what the right word is for it, but it is not something she would have wanted to do. So Sam has basically encouraged her to ask him for this, which means she knows she's going to be sort of indebted to him. And he was the reason that when Sam finds her that she's in such a terrible position and so unhappy, right? So to Sadie, I think there's this realization that for Sam, their success in the video game industry was sort of just more important about her feelings and what mattered to her. And when she eventually confronts him about this, even if it's not clear, Sam realized what he was asking of her, or whether he was even aware that it was Dove's game engine, or that this game engine was the same person that she was in that bad relationship with. He sort of doubles down on like, I would have done it anyway, because finishing that game is what put us in the position we are now. So this is the main reason we've sort of drifted apart. A lot of people see... I've seen a criticism of the book that a lot of the conflict between Sadie and Sam really comes down to miscommunication, but I actually don't think that's giving enough credit. I think it's... Even if they talked about it, I think that conflict is still there, especially with the way he sort of describes that he still would have wanted her to go get the engine, even if he knew what it meant to her. It's not necessarily that he did it maliciously either. I actually think this was an interesting point of the book where it's definitely not black and white. And that feels real too, right? I think that's one of the best things about the book, is that these characters are not written in a way, I didn't think anyway, where it's like very obvious that you should be Team Sadie or Team Sam, even if people seem to be picking sides. They resent each other for somewhat legitimate reasons, or that are at least debatable. I haven't mentioned Sam's roommate, which is Marks, who sort of just accidentally becomes the CEO of their company by sort of funding the first game, so he gets a producer credit. He lets them use his apartment. He's from money, and he's not really some inspirational creative figure. He's just like a good dude. that helps things run properly and keeps everyone happy and is basically like a paternal figure to both of them in a weird way. He's a theater kid turned producer. He was a big theater kid. Yeah. Anyway, so they all move out to California. They're making new games. Sam and Sadie's relationship is very strained. Eventually, Sadie gets romantically involved with Marks, which is a big sort of inflection point in the story because for Sam, you know, Sadie represents, I mean, for Sam and Sadie, their relationship is that of like, we are not lovers, we are not romantic, but we have a bond. We have something more rare than, you know, being boyfriend and girlfriend. Like as a partnership, not only do we produce these amazing games, but we have a sort of relationship that most people don't have, even in a platonic way. So Sam sees Sadie and Marks, his buddy, getting together as a sort of a loss. And I think they do a good job of... It's not that he's like, I wish I was dating Sadie. It was more, I'm worried I will lose what she represents to me, which is not a romantic partner, which is just a creative partner. He does get super pissed and shaves his head over this. Yes, after getting drunk. Their gay employees are important to the story, their wedding and political views of Mapletown. Yes, so this game that has become very popular now, which is this online role-playing game where you exist in this fictional world where they can decide to be much more progressive than the America of the 1990s. Is the book all from Sadie's POV? No, it's you jump between Sadie and Sam. And then the most beautifully written part of the book is from the perspective of Marks, where so they've made this Mapletown game where anyone can get married. This is when the same-sex marriage debates are going on in the States, which wasn't that long ago, eh? So the game sort of becomes a bit of a political statement, or at least some people see it that way. So while Sadie and Sam are away on doing press for her newer game, some guys show up with guns to their offices looking for Sam, presumably to kill him. And they accidentally they see someone who they think is Sam. They try to shoot him. Marks kind of tries to intervene, and Marks gets shot. Yeah. Tamer of Horses. All right, these are big spoilers now. Okay. So the best part of the book, or the most beautifully written part of the book, is a section written from the perspective of Marks on life support, unable to communicate with the people around him. Just like a huge gut punch. And yeah, I think anyone reading this book, this is super emotional. What is this music? One sec. I think we need something a little more. Give me a second here. Why did I like the Marks section? I think it was the best written section. And I thought the sort of imagery they have of like the bird, the section begins and ends with the sort of imagery of a bird trying to fly away. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how specific to be. I just thought it was a really beautifully written part. I think how we arrived at that point felt a little sort of cliche, or like over the top, a little contrived. You know, Sadie finds out she's pregnant, then they immediately hear there's a shooting there, and it's him. You know, it felt a little like Fault in Our Stars teen movie sort of. What's the saddest sort of situation we could contrive out of this? Yeah. But it felt raw and a little, I don't know. It's a little harsh to describe it that way, maybe. So anyway, obviously this plunges Sadie into a pretty big depression. Sam as well, although his way of dealing with it is just trying to push forward with work and keeping their company alive. It hits different being a reader in your 30s versus a teen or a young adult reader. Yeah, and I hope I'm not being condescending here. You know, there's books you read as a young adult that might feel very relatable to you in a way that won't in 10 years. Like, I used to read The Catcher in the Rye once in a while. And as a teenager, I loved that book and felt like there was a lot of truth in the perspective of your protagonist there. And I remember reading it when I was like, I don't know, like 25, and I'm like, this kid doesn't really know much about the world, you know? And I'm like, oh, fuck, that's me. The book didn't change. Yeah. Have you talked about how Mazer was physically disabled and how that affected his relationship with Marcus and Sadie? All I've done is I'm just trying to describe the book at this point, but you're right. A huge component of it, and I feel like I understood Sam's character better than Sadie's, and a lot of his character could be understood from the lens of his own his difficulty dealing with his disability, and how that sort of made him a closed off person, not letting people to get close to him or see his vulnerabilities. Like, even in terms of their romantic relationships, Sam doesn't really seem interested in that. So I saw people speculating, like, is he asexual? Is he... if Sadie had expressed any romantic interest in him, would he have just gone for it? I think whatever baggage you bring to the book, you could sort of make an argument in either of those directions. But I think what's clear is that his physical disability has made him very closed off from wanting to let anyone get close to him in an intimate sort of way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Sam is trying to keep their company alive in the aftermath of this tragedy. And Sadie's just not showing up to work or doing anything. She's kind of working from home, but not. And just to keep the sort of company alive, she is working in the background and agrees to at least finish the game they were supposed to release at the end of that year. And she does. It's an expansion pack for the game she had released or was doing press for when Marx was shot. And Sam never really played the game, but when he's interviewing some other people who are going to work and come make a game for their studio, the person starts talking about how much they liked the game, and they mention a specific part, which was she had hidden a sort of Easter egg in the game that was a reference to Marx and his love of romantic, what's the word? Not just plays. It's like references to like the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I think a lot of people saw that Easter egg as just a reference to Marx, but how Sam interprets it is that it's also a message from Sadie to Sam in a way, because it's something only the two of them would really appreciate and understand about Marx. So this takes us to part 9 of 10 of the book, which I was really hoping would go in a different direction here, right? So, like, we're getting close to the end. Sadie and Sam aren't talking, but he feels like she's made some sort of overture, an expression of something to him in this game they released about this person they loved that they both lost. She's at home with a newborn at the time, too. And In response to this, he creates a game or an expansion pack to their game that was basically just an excuse to try to reconnect with her. He made a game that he thought she would be interested in playing, and then when he saw that her IP address logged on, he, as an avatar in the game, developed a relationship with her in it. This was my least favorite part of the book. I think because I just wanted it to be something very specifically different, which is that I was really hoping he would make his own A game as like an expression, something just unselfishly just for her, not a Trojan horse to sort of reconnect with her, but like it could have been like a very powerful expression of love to be like, I made this game as a tribute to our friend we lost and you, not a here's my way of trying to trick you into talking to me again. Maybe it would have felt a little too neat and buttoned up. Instead, it felt like kind of manipulative and shitty. And she reflects on this after and being like, she knew it was him she was sort of engaging with in this virtual world. And Dove gives her the same response. Like, you must have known you were talking to Sam. Like, it was the parallels to their relationship in the game was too obvious, down to like very specific details, you know. But she sort of comes out of that, I think, at least realizing that she does feel at least some desire to reconnect. As much as I didn't like that penultimate section of the book, I really think they nailed the landing or the feeling of it, which is she goes back to teach at MIT. So Dove is leaving his position there and suggests to her that she could teach his course on what is it, creative game development, or I can't remember the name of the course, which is a really, it felt very poetic in the sort of symmetry of like her beginning experience in that course, being one of the only women there, having this shitty teacher, and for her to go back as the teacher to see more representation of women in the classroom and to be able to offer those students something better than what she got. And it even offers some like interesting observations that like this sort of conflict in her of like, hey, I was really successful out of like a very toxic, unhealthy situation here, and I'm having trouble even expressing to these kids or being truly honest with them about that. And even, you know, Sadie at this point in her mid-30s has a bit of boomer energy that I found sort of relatable about how kids these days are different. So I thought that felt really honest. So she's back at school and she finds out Sam's grandfather has died. He's the one who raised Sam's grandparents had really raised him since his mom died at such a young age. And in his will, she shows up to the funeral and she kind of reconnects with Sam there. And in his will, he leaves her the Donkey Kong machine from their pizza place, from Dong and Bong's pizza place in Koreatown in LA. And she's like, oh, I can't take this because it represented like Sam's childhood, but he wants her to have it. So Sam likes the idea of it ending up in an office in MIT from this pizza shop in K-Town, you know? So that felt good too. And so the game ends not with some giant emotional reunion or anything like that. I felt like that would have felt way too on the nose and not honest. Instead, it ends with them sort of, you know, having a conversation. He's seeing her off at the airport and, you know, he goes like, I will always want to make games with you if she ever wants to again. And at this point, I don't think you think that's all that likely. But she takes out of her bag like a disc or a drive, and she's like, "Here, I want you to look at this and tell me what you know or what you think." And it is her having been working on a game. So I thought they really nailed the landing there of it being, here's the promise of maybe we could work on another game together, the thing we love the most, in another day. So yeah, that felt good. The ending is maybe more emotional than even the Marks Park. There's something really beautiful about that, I think. And yeah, a lot of symmetry of that end feeling like the beginning. I hope they don't make a sequel. You know what? When an ending's that good, there's things I didn't like about this book, clearly. But with an ending that good, you really don't want them to mess with it. There's my synopsis. Does it feel like you read the book? I left out a lot of important details, especially about secondary characters. The worst part of the book was them never revealing what Sam's high score was on Donkey Kong. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. You know what? They also had some continuity errors. Like, they described Donkey Kong as having a tie, which, you know, he didn't have a tie in the original arcade game. One sec, I gotta find some music here. Too sad. We need to say, like, what do you want, some classical music? Maybe just some classical music. There were some video game continuity errors, Shannon. Yeah, and the author, there's a little acknowledgement section at the end, where she acknowledges that some of these were kind of deliberate, that she like wanted to name drop or reference specific games, even though they didn't line up with the historical period. Booktendo, is your Donkey Kong machine also 300 pounds? They weren't wrong about that. An old full-size Donkey Kong arcade cabinet is between 250 and 300 pounds. The Anna Lee stuff was weird. Yeah, I also found there was sort of the sections sort of recounting Sam's childhood and his mother and his relationship with her and her death all felt like they were told in almost like a not realistic way. It felt maybe intentional. Like, I'm not sure if that was an honest... I guess you're hearing it from the perspective of an omniscient narrator. It's not like this is Sam saying what happens, but it almost felt like... I don't know, is this a crazy theory that it was more of a sort of magical telling of what about his mother's story more than a real story? It was dreamlike. I think it was intentional. Yeah, did I miss some detail there? Like, do you think it's explicit that it felt like he was just giving some sort of fantasy take on who his mother was? Is this a book you would recommend to others, Ben? I enjoyed reading it. I just don't know if it'll really stick with me in a really, really much of a way. But it was an enjoyable read, especially if the sort of setting of them being in the industry or business of making video games, if that sounds at all appealing to you. I thought that was a really interesting context for telling this sort of story of friendship and love. Maybe that's how Sam remembers his mother. That I could see that being a bit of the take. It paralleled Sam envisioning the different lives of his mother. Yeah. I think I would recommend this book. I don't want to give you the impression I didn't like it. I enjoyed reading it. Especially after the last 2 books we read before this. It was nice to read a book that had female characters that weren't just plot devices. I found myself way more sympathetic with the Sadie character than Sam's character. Although there were times I found myself wondering about Sadie's motivation or interest in video games, even. Like with Sam, I think it's very explicit that games to him represented an escape from his physical limitations. Whereas for Sadie, there are many points in the book where she clearly is not happy being in the business of making video games. Where, I don't know, it sort of makes you question what she even loved about it in the first place. Poll, which character do you relate to most? Relate to, or... yeah, I don't want to make this like a who do you like more question. Relate more is probably good. Who do you relate to more? Sam? Sadie Sink. Sadie wanted attention, approval, and praise because her parents were so involved with her sister that she was second fiddle. That is a really good point. But that doesn't mean she loves making games. And she is not the one who sort of craved the popularity of the games either, right? Early on in the book, there's they talk about, Sam is studying math. And they talk about how there's a difference between being good at something and liking it. Did Sadie like making games, or was she just really good at it? Neither. I related to Marks the most. Marks, I think, was easily the most likable character. And is sort of unfairly treated as like a NPC plot device. I liked the Marks character. Almost too much. He almost seemed... Was that character constructed in a way just to make you feel even worse at his death? Making video games for her. Maybe making video games for her is a parallel to an abusive relationship, as in maybe you just get into it, not sure what you even liked about it in the first place, but you still can't let go. That's an interesting take. I like Sadie, but I don't relate. It's pretty even. He seemed too perfect, yeah. Marks was that guy that everyone has met at least once, where everyone they know likes him. We don't deserve Marks. I thought Marks was the third person their business needed for it to succeed. He was instrumental. I agree. I think it's just easy for some people who just see Sam and Sadie as like these brilliant creative forces and sort of dismissing the need of someone who just keeps the lights on. Mm-hmm. What else? What other... I think I've said this about every book we've read, but I felt the dialogue was a little goofy at times. Like, I was telling someone this. It kind of felt like, the show Gilmore Girls? You guys too young for this? On the Gilmore Girls, they'd be talking, and it's like, they would just drop a bunch of references to things for no reason, just to show how clever they were. Which was clearly the writers in the writer's room, just being like, let's drop in these references to show how clever we are. Sometimes if the dialogue felt a little bit like that. It kind of worked to show like how familiar they are with each other, how they've grown up together. But to me, it felt pretty... like, people don't actually talk to each other like this. Like, at one point, I think it's Sadie going like, oh, like, my game failed. I feel like the captain of the Titanic. And I think it's Marx who says back to her, you're not John C. Peabody the third, or whoever the name of the captain of the Titanic was. And it's like, this is so stupid. Like, people do not... That's not how people talk to each other, like, ever. But anyway, is that nitpicky? I don't know. It's not like all of the book was that. It was strange that some parts of the book felt written in a kind of juvenile way, but then you'd have these sections like the Marx, the Marx acceptance of death section written like incredibly beautifully and eloquently. Sadie and Sam had serious communication issues for having the friendship they were supposed to have. Yeah, but, you know, it's kind of like... Do you have a family member you've had issues with? Because I think friendships like this are almost like... more similar to a familial relationship than they are to like, oh, I'm friends with someone at school, and if they're mean to me, I won't be friends with them anymore. Well, it's a dead split. 100 votes, 50-50. They were more like cousins than friends. Also, I do want to acknowledge the author for knowing how to engage with a younger online audience. Like, we started with Emily Blaster over here. And so not only does she have that, her website in general, I just think is well done. Like there's actually I already had it open. There's like a reading club discussion guide for the book. She knows who her audience is, right? That it's probably people who are chronically online, like all people under 30 are. We could go through some of these. Some of these are interesting. All right. I'm going to end the poll with Sam with a 51% lead. How about that?
Ichigo.
Please don't tell me they made Solution. No. Only Emily Blaster's on this website if you want to check it out later. Sam and Sadie meet separate and meet again multiple times across the course of the book. The opening of the novel shows them reunite for the first time. Discuss why the way the scene is depicted and how it makes you initially feel about the characters in the relationship. I actually felt very unsure of their relationship in that introductory section. It was the only point in the book at which I felt Sam mostly saw Sadie as some sort of rival, which didn't really feel consistent with the rest of the book. So I actually felt like I had no appreciation at all for their dynamic in that first interaction. In retrospect, I think it's interesting that they meet in the context of a game, the Magic Eye puzzle itself being a game. It's interesting in the book, Sadie saw Sam in the subway first, but chose to ignore him. Yeah. Before Mazer invented himself as Mazer, he was Samson Mazer, and before that he was Samson before Mazur. A change of 2 letters that transformed him from a nice, ostensibly Jewish boy to a professional builder of worlds, and for most of his youth he was Sam, S-A-M, on the Hall of Fame of his grandfather's Donkey Kong machine. But mainly he was Sam. How does Sam identity as Mazer different from the Sam in the book? Why do you think he created a persona for his professional public life? It was clear he wanted to form an identity for himself out of the success they had with video games. That was a way of breaking free from his physical limitations of who he had been in his childhood and youth. I felt like a big difference between Sam and Sadie too, right? Like when their first game gets popular and he's the one who's doing all the press for it because he's good at it. He is very good at framing this narrative of he wants to contrive a history for them of how the game came to be that is good even if it's not true. He's like, hey, let's pretend we got together at this interesting place to first talk about the game. And she admits much later that like that didn't actually happen that way. He wants to be the author of his own story and feels a need to do that in a way clearly Sadie doesn't. Yeah, was to give himself power and feeling of control, whereas with his disability he had no control over that. He needed a mask persona for the public. But is it to hide the real him, or is it because he embraced the character he wanted to play and how liberating that was? I really didn't like Sadie. She seemed very selfish and victimizing. Victimizing like she embraced being a victim? I mean, she did go through her own... I mean, losing Marks, the father of her child, justifies her wallowing in her own self-pity, I think. Maybe you're talking more about she sort of blamed Sam for having to go to Dove to get the video game engine, is probably what you're referring to. Yeah, I don't see that as a... She blamed Sam for that, and maybe that wasn't entirely reasonable. But I actually empathize with Sadie there too, I think. Because am I wrong about this? Sam basically tells her, you know, the success of our first game, even if I knew going to Dove and asking for his video game engine, even if I knew how personally devastating that might be for you, I still would have asked you to do it. That didn't seem fair to me. And I think she was justified in being like, do you really love and care for me, or will this always just be about prioritizing success? And he cares about the material success and popularity of games in a way she never really did. Thought they were both unfair to each other. Yeah, like people are in real life. There isn't one answer to this. Three, no, Sam said. It's more than romantic, it's better than romance, it's friendship. Sam laughed. Who cares about romance anyway? Again, sorry, we already sort of talked about this. I think you can interpret this a lot of different ways. If Sadie had expressed any romantic interest in Sam at all, I think he may have embraced it. Even if that was not something very important to him about their relationship. Like towards the very end of the book, he kind of asks her, like, just why did we never become romantically involved? And it's sort of, to the person sort of calling him a neckbeard earlier, maybe this is what you're thinking of. Because it's sort of, it is a bit of a confrontation. It sort of puts the onus on her to provide an answer to that. And her answer is just like, I never saw you romantically. And it just seems strange that, you know, if he didn't at all in any capacity, is he asking her this question? Or is it just the difficulty of, you know, maybe more so I can only bring a male perspective to this, but like I've had really good female friends in the past when I was younger, when I was single. And I think there was this sort of weird expectation of like, you know, are you just, you know, you're only her friend because she isn't interested in you sort of thing. I think a lot of men have probably experienced this. So he might just be sort of embodying that kind of toxic attitude that there must be something wrong with him or her, that their closeness did not result in that sort of relationship. I think Sadie blames Sam a lot of things because her games weren't as popular, and while she put her heart in all the games, Sam's were far more reaching to the general audience. I don't know that Sadie resented Sam for his games or his ideas being more having more mass appeal, though. That is not what she liked about making games. I think she did feel crushed by the lack of success she had from her, from the King's Landing, or what was it called? The game she made with Sam where they both were responsible for different halves of it, and his was clearly more popular. Obviously, she was affected by its lack of success. But like this is the person making games that are art, like the like Solution, you know? I don't think they were trying to achieve the same things. I called him a neckbeard for how he reacted to Mark's dating Sadie and how he felt ownership over Sadie, like he had some dibs over her for Mark's. I don't know if that's fair. I mean, he did react like an idiot. And that probably is the point of the book in which he is the most unagreeable. But in the context of the story of, you know, I have this creative partner and together we do amazing things. His reaction to thinking he might lose her in a non-romantic capacity to having a romantic relationship with his friend and other business partner, it made sense that he had a negative response to that, even if there was a lot of immaturity in that response. Sam with Mark's drunken, you can get with any girl, why ruin my chance with her? Was it why ruin my chance with her, or why take her away from me and what she is? Yeah, they also did lie to him for a whole year about having a relationship, because they knew who he is and how he would respond. He was jealous even if it wasn't a romantic relationship he wanted. Okay, that's a good way of putting it. The reader sees Sam's journey with his disability. We've already talked about this a lot. I think so much of the Sam character should be interpreted through the lens of his disability. I also think he's just not the same. His disability is also a huge part of his success as a character, which I thought was nice. It wasn't, not to romanticize being impaired, but I thought there was there was a sort of sympathy or respectfulness in. It wasn't just like, oh, you're disabled, that's bad kind of vibes to it. Do you know what I mean? I'm not being very articulate about this because, you know, it's not something I can really relate to. But I think a lot of what made Sam a very successful person was also a product of his disability. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. What did you learn about gaming? I don't know if I learned anything about gaming. I don't know what Sam's high score is. I liked Sam less and less as the book went on, but that improved when he stepped up after Marx died. I agree with you. I thought he really, he stepped up in the aftermath of that tragedy, for sure. This question is for the normies. What, the video game one? With a disability, there's a lot of mourning for the life you could have had. Speaking from experience, you harbor a lot of self-hatred from not being able to do things the general population can. So I guess I'd be interested in people who can relate to this more. Like, did it feel like the story just made his disability an obstacle to overcome, or do you feel like it was just part of who he was and part of not just his failures, but part of his success in that way? And is that a more respectful way of having a character who has a disability that plays such an important part of their identity? I think that's kind of how I read it, but I don't know. He was trapped in a car crash. No one asked for Ashley. Oh. He was very stubborn about his health issues, like a lot of men are. Yeah, he's very resistant to dealing with his health issues. Like he defers and delays the amputation for a long time, right? I think I glossed over that in my summary. Marx is additionally introduced as Sam's roommate, an NPC, but ultimately grows to play a core role in the success of Ichigo, Ichigo, and Sadie and Sam's creative partnership. What early hints are there that Marx is critical to the story, and what does his character bring to the book? I think it was always obvious of how important he was to Sam, and how he almost served like as a guardian angel figure to Sam. But I could also see the criticism that Marx never became a sort of fully fleshed out character. I mean, it would have been way easier just to leave him as the very romantically successful version of Sam, let's say. There's definitely a bit of a parallel or foil going on there. I think when you start seeing him as someone who isn't just like some womanizing guy everybody loves, he becomes a bit more of a real person. There are hundreds of cultural references, book arts, games, more throughout the book. There are also some invented elements that accompany the real work, so these expansive references make Sadie and Sam's world feel different to the reader. How? It reminded me of that For All Mankind, Christine. That, you know, they're situating the story within like actual historical moments, I think is a very interesting storytelling device. Of like, oh, this game is being made while same-sex marriage was briefly legalized in San Francisco before they annulled all those marriages. And sort of to like, or we were about to release this game and then 9/11 happened and we had a conversation about whether we should release it or not. I do like the situating of a fictional story within a real world and having these real world events sort of punctuating the story. Yeah. And we haven't talked about, or I haven't seen many people talk about this, but the way the story would occasionally be like, as Sam would later tell Kotaku in an interview 10 years later, and it has like him giving an interview, like a fake interview for a video game website. I thought I really liked those occasional flourishes in telling the story that way. I don't think having lots of sex partners automatically makes you a womanizer. I don't know. I wasn't too concerned about using the term womanizer, but it did seem like Marx was... how do they describe it? That he sees being intimate with people and new experiences as such like a rewarding thing that he just wants to do it with as many people as possible. And to me, that reflects a pretty immature attitude towards intimacy, or certainly not a very deep one. I'm not particularly attached to the label womanizer, but I mean, Marx gets around. I don't know what you want me to say. I mean, I'm not saying he was like a misogynist who was just like playing pickup artist games with women. That's not the implication. The implication is he never really had much of a real relationship with these women at all, though. What do you think about the part of the question of cultural appropriation in Ichigo? I could definitely see Sam's point there. Sam's point that they couldn't have made the game in more recent history. Because they both seemed, I think, ethically or morally comfortable with releasing that game with all its very overt references and pulling from, Japanese culture and other influences. And then, yeah, Sam gives that interview where he very much rejects. He's like, I'm a mixed race person with a Jewish father or Asian, and he's sort of just like, what? I can only make games that only refer to my own sort of cultural identity. I mean, that is sort of also a overly simplistic way of looking at it. I do think taking the extreme position in either direction, I guess, is the wrong take here. I think if you are working on any piece of art that is pulling from cultural influences, that should be done in a respectful way. But I think taking like an extreme position, like a white person can't make a video game that references Japanese culture at all, is just a really... It does sort of reduce like the creative process to saying you can't create art that is of anything other than your own experience, I think. And that is also just, I think, a bad position to take. That's a tricky topic, though. I also thought it was interesting how they wanted to leave the gender of the character in
Ichigo.
their gender ambiguous, but they were convinced by the publisher that, oh no, make the character a boy, and more people will play the game if it's obvious that it's a boy. I think that's the book. I don't know. What do you think? I didn't ask you yet. I guess we always ask, did you read the book and did you like the book? Did you like the book? I've sort of gone back and forth here and already sort of told you I kind of think it was like junk food. But at the end of the day, I think I would have to say I liked the book. Loved the ending. They nailed the landing. It had its issues. I will watch the movie whenever it comes out. If they ever made a video game version of
Ichigo,
I would play it. I need a kind of option? No, I'm forcing you into a category here. No fence sitting. I was confused by the character having to be a boy because I remember my dad at around that time only playing female characters in online role-playing games. I think a lot of men chose to be female characters in games where you're role-playing in an open world. I think it's a different story in single-player narrative type games. I mean, like, how many, you know, big budget AAA games of our youth, or my youth, I guess I should say, had female protagonists? I know recently this has changed, but like when I was growing up, a single player game having a female lead character seemed pretty unusual, I want to say. And sometimes when it was, you know, are they basically there to be a sex object? Like those early Tomb Raider games. Yeah, it was very obvious that character was designed for the male gaze, right? Or even the Metroid games. Even back to like Super Nintendo. Oh, it turns out Samus in the suit is a woman. But like, hey, is there a way of seeing her in her underwear in the suit? Like, that was sort of the narrative around that. Lara Croft, or are you too old? I remember the first Tomb Raider game coming out. I think I lived in Australia at the time. Does that make sense? 96? When did the first Tomb Raider come out? 96, yeah. Mortal Kombat? You could play as women in Mortal Kombat? I guess everyone in Mortal Kombat was some sort of like physical fantasy though, right? The men and women. And the guy with 6 arms and 12-pack abs. So what was the first good video game that had a female lead? Or what was the first video game with a female lead who was a real character? Everyone was ripped in Mortal Kombat. You want to hear something funny? I went to Italy with my family when I was in high school still. So this would have been early 2000s. And on our, like, we were in a tour group, and there was a couple in our group, and the guy had done motion capture for the first or second Mortal Kombat game. And the guy was just absolutely jacked. Like, kind of incredible looking guy. His girlfriend was also gorgeous. And it was so strange to be on this tour group with a bunch of normies. And then these two were just like incredible looking people there. It's like we weren't the same species, you know? Ms. Pac-Man. Ms. Pac-Man is the first game with a good female character. I definitely prefer Ms. Pac-Man to Pac-Man. I was hoping the book, because the book mentions Ms. Pac-Man and Sam playing it. I was really hoping they would go on a bit of a tangent with why Ms. Pac-Man is different than Pac-Man, because I think it's interesting. Because the first Pac-Man with Mr. Pac-Man, I guess, is all about pattern recognition. If you memorize certain patterns, you could beat that game 100% of the time. Whereas Ms. Pac-Man has an element of randomness in it that means you can't just beat the game based on following a preset pattern. And if you were really reaching, you could use this to make some sort of analysis of gender differences about the predictability or patterns of men versus women. But I wouldn't do such a thing. Dixie Kong? I was never a big... I didn't really play the Super Nintendo Donkey Kong games, but I'll take your word for it. I know Donkey Kong 64, the Candy Kong wasn't the best character. Did you watch Tetris? I did. Christine and I watched Tetris the other night. Really did not enjoy the movie, but found the story of the sort of disputes over their rights and licensing to be interesting. But yeah, I really did not like the style of that movie. Can someone from LA confirm or deny the secret highways? If they existed, they shouldn't tell you, right? I should watch the doc. Is there a Tetris documentary? There's a Tetris movie? Yeah, it just came out on Apple TV with Ansel Egafor or something. What's his name again? I always butcher that guy's name. Lana Del Rey confirmed it. Yep. Yeah, old documentary, The Bromance, though. Ansel Elgort. Taron Egerton, is that right? I don't know. I didn't... the subject matter is very interesting. Ansel Effort. I really didn't like the style of the movie. Sometimes it's like... I imagine that whoever made that movie, or was like the director, like had a lot of experience making music videos. You know, sometimes you see a popular movie or a new movie and you're watching it and it feels just like you're watching a 2-hour music video. That's what watching this movie felt like to me. The Tetris video by Gaming Historian is so good. Okay, Croft, thank you. I am interested in knowing more about the history of Tetris without it being baked into a not the most enjoyable movie. Does anyone remember Radio Shack? I remember Radio Shack. I bought a Radio Shack stack challenge game. It was Tetris for poor people. It's like the Elvis movie. The Elvis movie was completely like that, even more so. I really did not like the Elvis movie. Croft. I gotta cue that up so I don't forget. Gaming Historian, was it? Was it just called Tetris? Was there a alien video game? Ripley was great. Ripley, great female action movie character. All right, I think we're done with the book. Okay, so next month, this month, April is 100 Years of Solitude, right? Where is that? All right, is it shorter? Ooh, it's not shorter. By Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I've tried to read this book once before. I want to say I got... Oh, the bookmark's still in there. I got 40 pages into it, and I was like, I do not like this book, and I stopped reading. I've seen a few people now say they're not into this book. I don't think I want to give up on it, though, because I know this is one of those books where occasionally you'll meet someone who, like, this book is amazing once you get into it. So maybe there is something there. Maybe you need to overcome a barrier. I was hoping this month's book was an April Fool's joke. Why are we reading it then? A lot of people love this book. So I don't know. Are we missing something? It's a hard read. I don't mind a hard read if it's worth it. Some of my favorite books I've ever read were difficult to read. But that you should be rewarded for reading a difficult book. On Discord, there's a pinned message that has a list of books for almost the entire year, for anyone asking. Anyway, so I would still like to read this book, I think, but if people are overwhelmingly saying they hate this book and don't want to read it, I could probably be talked out of it. But I mean, we're already April 2nd, right? So we only have 4 more weeks to read it. What were some of your favorite books that were hard to read? My favorite book ever is a book called Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. And that is... there's a few different ways of reading that book, and some of them are much harder than others. That's a bit of a strange answer, but it's kind of hard to explain without really getting into the book. You should just read The Handmaid's Tale instead. I did forget to put The Handmaid's Tale in the calendar. I don't think switching is a good idea. People might have trouble getting what the pick... Yeah, I think it's too late to change the book. I'm going to read this book. I'm going to read 100 Years of Solitude. I'm very much expecting fewer people to have read this one, though. Just based on how people are already talking about it. Yeah, I think a lot of you already got the book. Let's do it. We're going to stick with this book. I think I will keep in mind with some of the future books. There might be 1 or 2 already in there that if people are already feeling a certain way about it, maybe we'll switch it out with something that's a little bit more enjoyable or accessible. Like I might swap out Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance for Handmaid's Tale, or I don't know, like I wanted to add some Kurt Vonnegut in there somewhere, and I just didn't. I've never read much I haven't really read Vonnegut at all, so can we have the stream in Spanish? That would be a little tough for me. I left the Discord because it got really crowded. Thought I made the Discord in a way where like that wouldn't really happen. How crowded is too crowded? Like more than 10 people? Like how many people are active in the Discord right now? Like 200 people at the most? That's too crowded. Can't wait for The Shining. I do really want to read The Shining. We won't drop The Shining. We might drop Zen. Benito, that's me. Handmaid's Tale was an easy read, hard emotionally, but a quick read. Okay, maybe we throw Handmaid's Tale in there. Swap it out. I feel bonita. Does this channel have a Discord? We do have a Discord. If someone wouldn't mind dropping the link. The Discord is mostly where we talk, where book club discussion happens. Yesterday's stream was hilarious. I don't know what you're talking about. Did I stream yesterday? I look bonita? Thank you. You mentioned Catch 22 during Matt's stream? I read this when I was in high school, and I'm quite certain I did not appreciate it in the way I could have. I remember being pretty actively confused while reading the book. Set in the closing months of World War II, an American bomber squadron off Italy. It's the story of a bombardier named Yossarian who is frantic and furious because thousands of people he hasn't even met keep trying to kill him. It's about the absurdity of war, right? I wouldn't say that's an easy read. Operation Banana Split. Unsplit. Oh, all right. 80% of you like the book. We'll take it. It's definitely the most well-received book we've read so far. Please give us the VODs back. I like the idea of streams being what's the word? Ephemeral? Is that the right word? Like yeah, ephemeral. 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 I think I might make a few playlists for some of them, maybe for like playthroughs or previous book clubs, just so people can refer back to that. But the sort of just like everyday weekly streams, I understand people who can't watch them in the moment liking to have a VOD, but I kind of like the idea of them not just existing in perpetuity either. Ichigo? Ichigo. Please, I'm from a different time zone. See, I get that, and that's why like I wouldn't I wouldn't make it a normal thing to just immediately delete a stream, I don't think, unless I have a reason to. But just once a stream is like a year old, it just doesn't need to exist anymore, right? I love watching the Jump King VODs. That's wild. You are an interesting person, Silly Mushkins. What about the Moon Baboon? Yeah, that should be preserved for all time. You're right. Europeans can't always watch. I understand. So, like, I'm not saying things will immediately cease to exist. But the idea of doing a purge once in a while, I think is kind of funny and justifiable. And not to the detriment of people who would have had months to watch that potentially. Although I'm surprised how many people I'm seeing who say they watch old VODs. All right, I'll think about it. I'll think about it. Just make them all members only? That's not a bad idea. Don't do that. All right, I gotta go. I gotta start reading this book. This is one I don't think I can leave till the week before. How long is it? It's 400 pages of small text. This is definitely a longer book. The letters are too small. They're small. Uchi mama! Alright. Well, that was a good book. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for hanging out. Yeah, thanks for joining. I'll see you. I don't know if I'm... Tomorrow is Monday. I feel like after the purge, I feel like I'm in the middle of a detox or something. I don't know what tomorrow might be. I might not stream tomorrow. I'll let you know. I gotta keep you on your toes, you know? But there's always the promise of tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And, you know, maybe a second year of streams, maybe. 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 Maybe.
Ichigo. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Tomorrow.